Welcome to Justice Is Now, the podcast. Justice Is Now is a charity with an aim of increasing the conviction rates regarding sexual violence. In each episode, we will be discussing various issues relating to this from many angles and discussing how education for criminal barristers could be changed. We will also be looking at understanding offending behaviour on a deeper level. And of course, we will continue to amplify the voices of survivors. Learn more about the work of Justice Is Now. All the details are below each episode, or you can surf there right now on www.justiceisnow.org. And it is only fair to give you a trigger warning. This podcast does contain graphic descriptions and frank discussion of sexual violence. Some listeners may find it disturbing or triggering, so please practice self-care. And if you don't think it's for you, then please don't listen. We receive no government funding for this important work, and so we're entirely reliant on donations. So if you can help us at all, please donate on the website www.justiceisnow.org. Thank you.
So we're joined today by Charlotte Clayton. And Charlotte, thank you so much for being on the Justice Is Now podcast. I'd really like to, first of all, just hand over to you to explain about the work that you do in Trafford, your role and, your experience within working in this sector.
Thanks, Leonie. It's such a pleasure for me to be here. So my name's Charlotte Clayton, and I'm currently the CEO of TRC, Sexual Abuse and Rape Support Greater Manchester. So we are a Rape Crisis Centre. We're part of Rape Crisis England and Wales, our membership organisation, and we've been providing support and information to women and girls in Trafford, which is where we're sort of physically based, but across Greater Manchester for 13 years now. I've got a few years under my belt with this organisation. I started as a volunteer about 9 years ago, progressing to become a trustee, and then they gave me a job, which is absolutely brilliant. So I'm very much invested in this as an organisation, and more widely in the rape crisis movement, having worked in the women's sector for a number of years and previously working with women on probation.
Wow, fantastic. I mean, what a incredible journey coming from being a volunteer and moving up. It's fantastic to hear, and that commitment to the cause as well. It's amazing. And I suppose one of the things that we thought it'd be useful to talk about is around, rape myths and facts. So obviously we know within society there are assumptions that people may make based on, potentially prior biases or unconscious bias, or things that they may think happen within, the sphere of what actually rape is. And one of the things we've been finding when we've looked at the court, so when rape victims do get to court, is that the myth about a complainant not going straight to the police after an assault is something which is used a lot. And in fact, it was actually a defence barrister who approached us when we were setting up the charity, because they felt that was an overuse, and it's still something which is used frequently. So I just wanted, from your experience, just kind of to explain to people why people do not go to the police straight away, and why that is a kind of a real bad barrier, I suppose, to justice for people. Yeah,
absolutely. It's such a barrier, isn't it? Because you're almost damned if you do and damned if you don't. If you go to the police straight away, you run the risk as a person who's experienced sexual violence of, overreacting. It's so unhelpful, isn't it, when you have people in positions of authority referring to rape and sexual violence as probably regretful sex. And that, that has such a detrimental effect, not only on women reporting rape and sexual violence, but on accessing and coming forward to access any sort of support to rebuild their lives. There are so many reasons and barriers to reporting and seeking help. The very, as you say, the perpetuation of these rape myths, that somehow, if you'd had too much to drink or you'd taken drugs, that, maybe, that was your fault. and that you would be viewed as an unreliable witness were you to come forward and report that you were raped at the point where you were drunk or under the influence of any sort of substance, really. We have a problem, don't we, with the fact that trust in the criminal justice system, the point of entry into that, the police, you've got a number of police forces investigating multiple officers for crimes of a sexual nature, and here in GMP there is an investigation underway into people being sexually assaulted whilst in custody. So if that weren't enough, you have the real impact of trauma on the brain and physiological impact of trauma. If violence has been used or if violence hasn't been used, the impact of trauma on somebody's brain after they've experienced sexual violence is enormous. One of the common responses is to shut down, to totally detach yourself from the horror of the experience. If you've done that, if that's the way that your body has responded to being raped, of course you're not going to come forward, because it didn't happen to you. It happened somewhere else, to another body in another time, and you just absolutely are in denial. You're absolutely nowhere near the point where you're going to be ready to even speak the words of sexual violence. And certainly we have women using our helpline who want to literally practice the words of sexual violence in order to gain the confidence to speak them to the police and say them out loud in order to safeguard themselves. It can't be overestimated the impact that trauma can have on a person. That there are really solid reasons, and there is an awful lot of research and evidence out there that will back this up. When we experience trauma like that, there is a number of different responses. A lot of people talk about fight or flight. Well, here in the Rape Crisis Service, we talk about the 5 Fs: fight, flight, flop, friend, freeze. There are a lot of different recognized physiological and sort of emotional responses. They go right back into that kind of primitive part of your brain. There's no sort of rational decision making going on. It's pure preservation going on, and that's why in the sort of work that we do in supporting people to process their trauma, at whatever stage that may be, it may be decades later, it can still be processed to a greater or lesser extent. It's not simply a matter of talking through that trauma, and actually sometimes that can be quite detrimental. What is often the way to get past trauma is to be able to sit with that trauma and to be able to in a safe and secure place, be able to experience those bodily responses to reliving that trauma over and over again, and to be able to sit with those bodily responses and to be able to develop some kind of positive coping strategies to deal with those, so that over a period of time the incidences of having that overwhelming sort of flashback situation and that feeling of terror, that feeling of high anxiety, over a period of time of practicing sitting with that terror and managing it and self-soothing in a safe place within a trusted relationship, that's how we go about responding to the experiences that women have. And you can imagine how different is that to the average experience of the criminal justice system. You may well be in a situation where you have a positive experience, and we do support women who have very positive experiences, and thank goodness, because it's only by having positive experiences and having your case fully prepared, and so that it does meet that evidential threshold, so that it can eventually reach trial, because we know that most people accused of serious sexual offences, rape for example, plead not guilty. So it will be trial for most people. So eventually, when you get there, we are relying on people having that resilience and having a good enough experience to be able to withstand that process, that very long process, and to hopefully achieve a conviction to actually remove dangerous, violent perpetrators of sexual crimes from the streets, so that they can't continue to perpetrate those crimes of sexual violence.
Incredible the way you kind of summed all that up. And one of the things when you were talking about the 5 different responses, which really resonated with me, is when I talked to a past victim survivor, and she said she couldn't even say the word rape. She couldn't actually say it because it was just so difficult. And then, I remember somebody else from when I was at school who talked about, because people were making jokes about it all the time and how difficult that was. And it kind of goes back to my concern, is that there's a slight desensitization in society towards rape, actually, and serious sexual violence, because, it has been made into sometimes diminished, and there's a concern for me that people don't understand as well the way that you react to sexual violence in that situation. And we know that if you do get to if it does get to court, which is a small minority of those who will report, who'll get to court,
tiny minority.
That, it's who could potentially sit on the jury, and how do we know that they know enough about actual perpetrator behaviour? And that's one of the things I think is kind of missing in this process, is that people don't understand what perpetrators do and how they do it, and around like emotional manipulation, it could be financial manipulation, it could be opportunist, it could be in that moment, you've never committed a sexual violence crime before, but you feel that the opportunity presents itself, you take it because at that moment at time you don't care about the other person, it's just your needs. And also just about how, perpetrators themselves, they do use lying tactics, they're manipulative, they're not going to admit it. And that's another part of the cycle that concerns me, is that even if there's high evidence against you, and I use a case, I know, and it's okay to share this because the individual agreed. So she... a family friend member, this is an adult I'm referring to, she knew this gentleman for like 25 years, family friend.
Yeah.
And she was a financial advisor, and she went to his office in his house, and he turned on her and raped her. So she went into the freeze because she was trying to survive, as you do. After it, she managed to get away, and as she was going back to, her house, and she did go, bless her, to the police, found the strength, he had texted her and said, I know I raped you, please don't go to the police or I will commit suicide. So again, typical perpetrator behaviour, trying to guilt the person that they've just assaulted. Now, when he went to the police, when he got called in, he took a not guilty, despite that evidence. And the reason why is because when I was talking to another barrister, the barrister said he probably thought, chance it in court, make it off. And that is the concern that I think sometimes a missing point. When you have low conviction rates, and I'm not saying every case is different, but when you have low conviction rates, you're less likely to get people to go, I'm going to take a guilty plea now. And also there's...
And if you're a barrister or you're a solicitor, you're going to be giving that advice, aren't you, unfortunately?
Yeah.
Because, that's in your interests.
Yeah. It is. And it's I suppose it's about, because, a barrister that I talked to recently, and he's 20 years, he's defended and prosecuted, and really interesting conversation. And, you know, he was saying that he can't believe it sometimes when that evidence is like that people wouldn't just go for a guilty plea. But then it goes back really to, if you're sitting on the jury, what is our test threshold? How do we know that people on that jury know anything about sexual violence, know anything about the 5 responses that
5
you mentioned,
responses, yeah,
and know anything about perpetrator behaviour? So I do feel there is no way that we can find out what jury deliberations are. We're not allowed that access.
No, we have to take into consideration unconscious bias. When we are living in a society where we are, as individuals, bombarded with sexualized images and misogynistic messages being constantly reinforced, the internet is a fantastic resource, but it's given birth to this absolute monster, which is freely available porn of all genres, violence just on tap. So young people, people of any age, of course, but young people are being brought up on a diet of this stuff. When you look at the research into the sort of average age a child is exposed to online porn images, it's absolutely shocking, and only time will tell what the impact of that's going to be down the line, because these are the sort of young adults of now, aren't they, who've grown up in this absolute internet era of sex on tap, and of course now, especially impacted by COVID, or we don't necessarily go out and interact in our social groups still, even now, to the same extent that we did. The people who are maybe in the late teens, early 20s now had that period of in those really formative years when you were kind of first going out, who weren't first going out, they were sitting in their bedrooms and weren't interacting. And the proliferation of sort of apps to meet people, for hookups, is an invitation for unhealthy interaction from my personal perspective. Certainly we get a proportion of people, coming to us for support who have experienced sexual violence perpetrated by people who they've come across on apps. So there's none of that kind of social how would you call it? If you get introduced to sort of like a friend of your brother, somebody from school, a friend of a friend, there's that whole kind of social pressure to not be an absolute, sorry, I'm trying to think of a polite word, to not perpetrate sexual violence upon that person, when you meet up with them or hook up with them or whatever you want to call it, but if we're meeting, who knows who these people are behind these profiles, and if that is the way that people are interacting now, that is another layer of opportunity for the perpetrator and potential risk for, people out there who are just trying to make a connection, an absolute basic human desire to make connections with other people. And yet it is fraught, particularly as a woman, it is fraught with danger. And, going back to your point about juries and that, what I would sort of come back to is the those internalized messages. You're existing in a society where these messages are everywhere. You can't avoid them, even if you try. They are everywhere. They're on billboards, they're on the fronts of actual newspapers, they're in your news feed, they're clickbaits all over that sort of kind of constant stream of titillating non-articles that you're constantly sort of exposed to when you're online, unless you consciously make an effort to sort of analyze your absorption of all this stuff and really reflect on what it's doing to you as an individual, what it's doing to your relationships, what it's doing to your feelings about your sister, your mum, your female work colleagues, then you're not going to really grasp the pervasive effect that this is having. We go into schools and colleges and sort of youth services, and facilitate workshops on healthy relationships and consent, and talk a lot about, what is it and what is not. The absence of a no doesn't mean yes. Sort of getting that message over, and really honing in on what you might consider to be the sort of lower level behaviour, which, just referring back to what I mentioned earlier, the sexual violence continuum, that lower level, sort of on that pyramid, which is such a great graphic for sort of demonstrating the effect of this so-called lower level behaviour. It's all about the catcalling, the sex-based street harassment that absolute vast majority of people, women, experience and have experienced by the time they reach adulthood. In fact, that's the sad fact of it. So all of that, the sexist jokes, the so-called locker room banter, all of that, if we accept that sort of behaviour, if we don't call that out, if we're not engaged bystanders when that sort of joke is being made in the office, and we're not saying, no, it's not okay, don't like that, then what are we to expect? If you accept that, then you come to expect the next thing, and the next thing is, the unsolicited sexual images. Back in the day, it was the sort of heavy breathing phone call, something that's a little bit closer to home, so now it would be very much based around your smartphone, the sort of unsolicited sexualized contact that happens. Then, because you've internalized all of this misogyny and all of this sort of messaging, about what it is to be an acceptable female, it's much better if you don't make a big fuss, don't be hysterical about anything, it's flattering. Why aren't you flattered? It's funny, isn't it? Well, it's not, is it? None of this is funny, because if you accept that next level of degrading of women, then what comes next? And what comes next is sexual assault, and finally, you have rape, you have ritualized abuse, you have femicide, and that's where it's headed. And very much, the sort of driving sort of determination of those of us working in this sector, or certainly us here, is to really walk the walk and challenge rape culture, and challenge it before it's had the chance to become established. Get the message out there to young people to say, you don't have to stand by. Don't stand by. Being an engaged bystander, this is how you can challenge it within your own sphere.
Yeah. And that's fascinating. And I've definitely noticed, like more males, definitely where I live, stepping in, standing up on nights out. I've seen people really look out for people, which has been, really great to see, actually. And but when you were talking then, it took me back to when I used to work with young people, and I kind of are going to share this again, because it reminded me about like dehumanization of people and how easy it is to do that. And we worked on with some young people who've been involved in a case, and it was possibly the most horrific case I've ever heard, and it involved a group attack. And there was a young girl who was 11 at the time, and the perpetrators were actually aged from 11 up to about 17. And they'd taken this individual from one place to the next place to the next place, and everybody had basically raped this individual. And it was harrowing, and to the point where it was an older guy who eventually stepped in and stopped it. But this individual had gone for like 4 hours, and they'd taken her from place to place, and they had it on CCTV, and they were walking past people. This is the thing with this girl who was in tears. You could tell there was a group of boys like taking her to the next place, and nobody stepped in to challenge, possibly because they were scared of a group, right? I understand that. But this happened about 12 years ago now. And I hope that now people would step in, but I don't know. But it was the whole point. These young men were so young, but so dehumanising of this individual. And we had these conversations afterwards with different people involved in the same school, where we talked about this girl. Basically, she was friends with one of the boys at school. She'd gone back to the house after school, right? Something I did so many times.
Fair enough.
Growing up, like as a friend, just go back. You know, this individual was a virgin. Not that's got anything to do with it. She could have slept with 1,000 men. I don't care. It doesn't give anybody the right to think anything less of this human being. So in personal choice, whatever. So this individual had gone back, and then he'd invited friends over, and then this is what happened. And I talked about that. And what was so shocking is that they were like, well, she shouldn't have gone back with him. What she expected to happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was this straight away, this dehumanising. And the reason for that, when we talk about perpetrator behaviour, is denial. Because there's such denial of seeing yourself as a perpetrator. You don't want to see yourself. You want to blame it on that individual. So then you avoid all responsibility. And I think that's one thing I've noticed about sexual violence, particularly, is about avoidance of responsibility.
And I think that this speaks to an issue that we have, that is recognised in the quality of personal and social education within some schools, and I certainly do find that when we're going into schools, I mean, I suppose to a certain extent we're invited into schools, so these are schools who already have sexual violence, and they are fully acknowledging the need for this sort of supplementary session around consent and around healthy relationships. So potentially you're going into schools who already are doing a really good job, but still there was some search really recently, wasn't there, about people who have just recently left school reporting that consent was never mentioned within their whole time at secondary school, which is horrendous, and it does young men such a disservice. Because like you're saying, you don't want to see yourself as a perpetrator. You may not intend to be a perpetrator. If you don't understand the legislation, if you have never been fully appraised of what sexual violence is, it is such a wide variety of behaviours. And I think also with the legislation, I'm not sure if it has finally been enacted, but the sex-based street harassment legislation that is sort of on the cusp of being enacted. So important to get that message over. And that's something that we talk about. It is now not only not okay to call out to a person in the street and make a sexualized comment. It is against the law to do that, and you could face a fine, and I'm not quite sure what else you might face, but at least it's something. It's being counted. And that's what it's about. It's about actually recognizing that is and something that as a society we do need to be calling out. We do need to be recording this, because this is what over time has that pervasive effect on absolutely every single one of us, and it is what leads to the prevalence, this out of control epidemic of sexual violence that we have. And not just here, like we were talking about just before we started recording. This is a global problem, and we stand alongside our sisters in countries all over the world where sexual violence is not counted, it's not recorded, where sexual violence is used as a weapon of war. It's absolutely barbaric.
And that's it. And I think that's it in the UK. It's about holding ourselves sometimes to a higher standard, and trying to be that lead in the world, really, and showing that we do not stand for sexual violence. And I do think it, you talked a little bit there as well about maybe people like sleepwalking into offending behaviour. Yeah. And you may have, it sounds awful, but like different perpetrators who are It could be any age really, because they're just walking from what they know, and then then they've got this, if they are looking at rape pornography, which is unfortunately they can just get a click away. Something that may be an idea in people's mind could be enacted, but that's not to say everybody would ever do that. But I'm just sort of saying, like, the conditioning of the environment, and then society to continue to blame victims. It does give it gives almost like a breeding ground for more likely to try it. For example, we talk about child pornography and child sexual abuse images. The more you've kind of heard about more people being taken to court for that, and the impact it has from having these sexual images on their computer, the more you would hope the message would get out there about people who would take that risk, or maybe consider it but haven't actually taken the next step to being a perpetrator. So having that culture which is really clear about the boundaries is really important, because I think otherwise getting this subversion of what's acceptable, what's not. I think it seems like it's quite a confused space sometimes.
This conversation with Charlotte Clayton continues on the next episode of the Justice Is Now podcast. If you've been affected by anything you've heard in today's episode, there is support for you. All the support lines are listed in detail in the show notes of each episode. Do feel free to reach out and access any support you need. Thank you once again for listening to the Justice Is Now podcast.